March 18, 1945, 27,000 feet over Friedrichshafen, Germany. Lieutenant John "Red" Morgan felt the B-24 Liberator shudder violently as German anti-aircraft fire bracketed his formation. Black puffs of smoke appeared all around, 88mm flak shells exploding, sending shrapnel in all directions. Morgan's bomber, nicknamed Lucky Lady by her crew, was part of a formation of 36 B-24s hitting a German aircraft factory. They'd just dropped their bombs and were beginning the turn home when the flak intensified. The Germans had the altitude perfect. The shells were exploding right in the middle of the bomber formation. Morgan heard the hits before he felt them. Wham! 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 Shrapnel punched through Lucky Lady's thin aluminum skin. The bomber shook. Instruments flickered. Then the flight engineer's voice came over the intercom, trying to stay calm but failing. "Skipper, we've got hydraulic failure. Complete failure. All systems." Morgan's heart sank. Hydraulic failure on a B-24 wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. The hydraulic system powered everything critical to landing: the landing gear, the wing flaps, the brakes, even the bomb bay doors. Without hydraulics, you couldn't extend the landing gear to absorb the landing impact. Without flaps, you couldn't slow down enough for a safe landing. Without brakes, you couldn't stop after touchdown. It was a death sentence for the aircraft, and possibly for the crew. Morgan looked at his co-pilot, Lieutenant Dave Fitzgerald. How bad? Fitzgerald was already checking gauges. Pressures at 0 across all 3 systems. Primary, secondary, emergency, all gone. Can we transfer from the other systems? There are no other systems, Red. It's all connected. Whatever hit us took out all the lines. Morgan tried the landing gear lever anyway. Nothing. The gear stayed locked in the up position. He tried the flap controls. Nothing. The B-24 was flying fine. The control surfaces and trim tabs used cables, not hydraulics, so Morgan could still maneuver. But landing? That was going to be a problem. Behind Morgan, in the waist gun positions, the damage was worse than he realized. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, the left waist gunner, had taken shrapnel to his left leg. The flak had punched through the fuselage and hit him just above the knee. Blood was soaking through his flight suit. The radio operator, Sergeant Tom Willis, was providing first aid, wrapping the wound tight. "How bad?" Chen asked, through gritted teeth. "Bad enough," Willis replied. "You're not walking out of here." Further forward in the nose compartment, the bombardier, Lieutenant Frank Hayes, had been knocked unconscious by a piece of shrapnel that grazed his head. The navigator was trying to wake him up, checking for serious injury. Morgan's crew of 10 was now down to 8 fully functional members. 2 were wounded, and they were 400 miles from England with no way to land safely. Over the intercom, Morgan's voice came through, steady and calm. "Crew, listen up. We've lost all hydraulics. That means no landing gear, no flaps, no brakes. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this is serious. But we've got options. I need damage reports from all stations. Call them in one at a time." One by one, the crew reported. Nose turret, operational. Top turret, operational. Radio room, operational. Ball turret, operational. Tail guns, operational. Waist guns, left waist gunner wounded, right gun operational. "All right," Morgan said. "We've got 4 engines running. We've got control surfaces. We can fly this bird all the way home. The question is, what do we do when we get there?" Fitzgerald leaned over. "Red, you know what the book says. Hydraulic failure over enemy territory, crew bails out over friendly territory, let the bird crash." "I know what the book says," Morgan replied, "but Chen can't bail out with that leg wound, and Hayes is unconscious. We bail out, they die." "So what are you thinking?" Morgan stared out the cockpit window at the English Channel, still 300 miles away. I'm thinking I land this bird. No gear, belly landing. We put her down on a runway and everyone walks away. Fitzgerald stared at him. Red, a B-24 weighs 36 tons. You put that down at landing speed without gear, without flaps, the impact will tear this plane apart. Not if I do it right. There is no right way to belly land a B-24. It's never been done successfully. Then we'll be the first. To understand why Morgan's plan seemed suicidal, you need to understand what hydraulics actually do on a B-24 Liberator. Hydraulic systems use pressurized fluid, usually oil-based, to operate mechanical controls that require more force than a human can provide manually. On a B-24, the hydraulic system powered landing gear. The main landing gear weighed over 1,000 pounds each. Lowering them required overcoming air resistance at 150+ miles per hour. No human could do that manually. Hydraulic rams pushed the gear down and locked them in place. Wing flaps. The Fowler flaps on a B-24's wings extended both backward and downward, increasing wing area and creating drag to slow the aircraft. They were massive. Each flap section weighed hundreds of pounds. Hydraulic actuators extended and retracted them. Brakes. After landing, the pilot needed to stop a 36-ton aircraft traveling over 100 miles per hour. That required hydraulic disc brakes on the main wheels, similar to car brakes, but much more powerful. Without these systems, landing became almost impossible. The numbers. A normal B-24 landing. Approach speed 110 to 120 miles per hour with flaps down. Touchdown speed 95 to 100 miles per hour. Landing roll 2,500 feet with brakes. Impact force absorbed by the landing gear, roughly 150,000 pounds. A belly landing without hydraulics. Approach speed 150+ miles per hour, no flaps to slow down. Touchdown speed 140+ miles per hour. Landing roll unknown, would slide until friction stopped it. Impact force absorbed by nothing. The belly of the aircraft would hit the runway directly. Belly landings had been attempted before in emergencies. Small aircraft sometimes survived, but a heavy bomber? At high speed? On a concrete runway? The fuselage would likely rupture. Fuel tanks could explode. The aircraft would probably cartwheel, break apart, or catch fire. The survival rate for heavy bomber belly landings was less than 50%. Morgan knew all of this, and he decided to try anyway. Lucky Lady crossed the English Channel at 15,000 feet, descending slowly to conserve fuel. Morgan had been doing calculations in his head for the past hour. The problem was speed. Normally, a B-24 approached a runway at 110 to 120 miles per hour, with flaps extended. The flaps increased drag and allowed the aircraft to fly slower without stalling. But Morgan had no flaps. Without flaps, Lucky Lady's stall speed, the speed below which the wings stopped generating enough lift and the plane fell out of the sky, was about 140 miles per hour. That meant Morgan had to touch down at 140+ miles per hour, 50% faster than normal. At that speed, the impact force would be catastrophic. Morgan needed to find a way to slow down without flaps. He thought about it. The B-24 had 4 engines. Normally, you used engine power to maintain altitude. But what if you used the engines differently? If Morgan reduced power on all 4 engines to near idle, the aircraft would descend. The descent would naturally reduce airspeed as drag increased. But he'd have to time it perfectly. Descend too fast, and he'd hit the ground before reaching the runway. descend too slow, and he'd overshoot. And once he committed to the descent, there was no going around. With no hydraulics, he couldn't retract the landing gear, it was already up, and he'd be committed to landing. One shot. That's all he had. Morgan started calculating approach angles and descent rates in his head. From 2,000 feet altitude, descending at 500 feet per minute, he'd need to start his final approach about 4 minutes from the runway. But that assumed he could maintain control at near-stall speeds. If the aircraft stalled during the approach, it would drop like a rock. No recovery possible. Fitzgerald watched Morgan scribbling numbers on his knee pad. "You really think this is going to work?" "I don't know," Morgan admitted, "but I'm going to practice until I figure it out." "Practice? Practice what?" "The approach. I'm going to fly practice approaches at altitude, figure out the exact power settings, descent rate, and airspeed. When I've got it down perfect, we'll land." Fitzgerald blinked. "You're going to practice a no-hydraulics landing in midair?" 15 times if I have to, however many it takes until I can do it perfectly."
If this story of pilot skill and determination is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps us bring you more incredible survival stories from World War II Vault. Now, let's see if Morgan can pull off the impossible.
For the next 2 hours, John Morgan flew practice approaches over the English countryside. He'd climb to 5,000 feet, configure the aircraft as if approaching a runway, then execute a descent profile while monitoring speed, altitude, and descent rate. Each time, he'd note what worked and what didn't. Practice approach number 1, too fast. Descended at the correct rate but crossed the threshold, where the runway would be, at 160 miles per hour. Too much speed for a safe belly landing. Practice approach number 2, too slow. Reduced power too much. Aircraft started to buffet. Early warning of a stall. Had to add power and abort. Practice approach number 3, better. Got the speed down to 145 miles per hour at the threshold, but the descent angle was too steep, would have hit short of the runway. Morgan kept adjusting. Tiny changes to power settings, slight variations in descent rate. His crew watched nervously. They knew what he was doing. He was trying to find the razor-thin margin where the aircraft was slow enough to survive the belly landing, but fast enough to maintain control. Practice approach number 7. Very close. Speed at 142 miles per hour, descent angle good, but the flare at the end, the moment when the pilot raises the nose to slow descent, was too aggressive. The aircraft ballooned back up, would have resulted in a hard secondary impact. Practice approach number 10, nearly perfect. Everything was right except Morgan crossed the threshold 20 feet too high. In a real landing, that would mean slamming down hard. By practice approach number 12, Morgan had it figured out. He needed to start his descent from exactly 2,200 feet, 4 miles from the runway. Reduce power to 25% on all 4 engines. Maintain 148 miles an hour airspeed in the descent. At 100 feet altitude, reduce power to 15% to decrease descent rate. At 20 feet, flare gently, nose up just 3 degrees. Touchdown at 142 miles per hour, wings level, nose slightly high. Then pray. After the 15th practice approach, Morgan keyed the intercom. "All right, crew, I've got it figured out. We're going to land at Wendling Air Base. I've radioed ahead. They're foaming the runway and standing by with fire trucks and ambulances." "Foaming the runway?" someone asked. "Fire suppression foam," Fitzgerald explained. "Reduces friction, helps prevent fires. Also might help us slide smoother." "That's reassuring," the tail gunner said dryly. Morgan ignored the sarcasm. "Here's what's going to happen. I'll bring us in at 142 miles per hour. We're going to hit hard. The belly will scrape the runway. There will be sparks, possibly fire. The aircraft will slide for probably half a mile before friction stops us. When we stop, I want everyone out of this aircraft in 30 seconds. That's not a suggestion. 30 seconds. Belly landings often result in fires or fuel explosions. We get out fast, we all survive. We hesitate, we die. Wounded crew? The navigator asked. Chen and Hayes get carried out. 2 men on each of them. Assign teams now. The crew organized quickly. They'd trained for bailouts and crash landings. This was just another emergency, except worse than anything they'd practiced. One more thing, Morgan said. Thank you for trusting me. Let's bring Lucky Lady home. Wendling Air Base had been notified of the emergency. Fire trucks lined the runway. Ambulances stood ready. The runway had been cleared of all other aircraft. And most importantly, fire crews had sprayed the entire 6,000-foot runway with foam, a thick white carpet of fire-suppressing chemical that would reduce friction and help prevent sparks from igniting fuel. Morgan circled the field once at 2,000 feet, reviewing his approach path. Tower, Lucky Lady beginning final approach. Roger, Lucky Lady, runway is clear, emergency crews standing by, good luck. Morgan lined up on final approach, 4 miles from the runway. Gear, Fitzgerald called out, running through the emergency checklist. Up and welded, Morgan replied. Flaps, inoperative. Fuel? Enough to explode if we're not careful. Great. Morgan reduced power. The 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 engines throttled back to 25%. Lucky Lady began to descend. Morgan watched the airspeed. 155 miles per hour, 150 miles per hour, settling at 148 miles per hour. Altitude, 1,800 feet. Descent rate, 500 feet per minute. Perfect. The runway appeared ahead, a white, foam-covered strip. 1,000 feet altitude, 3 miles out. Morgan made a tiny adjustment, adding a touch of power to flatten the descent slightly. 500 feet, 1 mile out. The B-24 was committed now, no way to abort, too low and slow to climb away. Here we go, Morgan said quietly. 200 feet. Morgan reduced power further, 15% on all engines. The descent slowed. The airspeed dropped to 145 miles per hour. 100 feet. Morgan could see the foam on the runway, fire trucks, crash crews. 50 feet. He pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose came up 3 degrees. The descent rate decreased to 200 feet per minute. 30 feet. Brace, Morgan shouted. 20 feet. The crew grabbed whatever they could, support structures, seat belts, anything solid. 10 feet. Morgan held the nose high. The tail would hit first, absorbing some impact. 5 feet. Time seemed to slow. Then Lucky Lady's belly hit the foam-covered runway at 142 miles per hour. The impact was brutal. The entire aircraft shuddered. Metal screamed as the aluminum belly scraped concrete beneath the foam. Sparks erupted despite the foam. The friction was incredible. Morgan fought to keep the wings level. If one wingtip hit first, the aircraft would cartwheel and disintegrate. Lucky Lady slid down the runway, trailing sparks and foam, slowing gradually. 100 miles per hour, 90 miles per hour, 80 miles per hour. The crew was thrown forward against their restraints. Equipment broke loose and flew through the fuselage. 70 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour. The screeching sound was unbearable. Metal on concrete, the entire belly of the aircraft being ground away by friction. 50 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour. Lucky Lady was slowing, but she was still moving, and they'd already used 4,000 feet of runway. 30 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour. Finally, after sliding for nearly a mile, Lucky Lady came to a stop. Total time from touchdown to stop, 47 seconds. For a moment, there was silence. Then Morgan's voice, calm and clear.
Everybody out, now, 30 seconds.
The crew moved fast. The top turret gunner popped his hatch and climbed out onto the wing. The waist gunners opened the waist door. It still worked, being manual. The navigator helped the bombardier, Hayes, who was conscious now but groggy. They dragged him to the waist door and handed him down to the tail gunner. 2 crew members grabbed Chen, the wounded waist gunner, and carried him toward the exit. Morgan and Fitzgerald stayed at the controls, making sure everyone else got out first. "Go!" Morgan shouted to Fitzgerald. "You first! I'm the pilot. I go last. Go!" Fitzgerald climbed out of his seat and headed aft. Morgan did a final scan. Fire warning lights were starting to illuminate. He could smell fuel. The belly tanks had ruptured in the landing. Avgas was leaking onto the hot runway. Time to go. Morgan climbed out of the pilot seat, moved through the cockpit, down through the navigator compartment, into the bomb bay, and out the waist door. He jumped from the door to the ground, about an 8-foot drop. He landed, rolled, got up. His crew was running away from the aircraft, toward the fire trucks that were racing toward them. Morgan counted 1, 2, 3, 9, 10. Everyone was out. He started running. He'd made it maybe 50 yards when Lucky Lady exploded. The fuel vapor and the ruptured belly tanks ignited all at once. The explosion was massive, a fireball that rose 200 feet into the air. The blast wave knocked Morgan flat. He covered his head as debris rained down around him. When he looked up, Lucky Lady was gone, just a burning wreck, twisted metal, fire everywhere. Fire crews were spraying foam, but there was nothing to save. Morgan sat on the grass watching his aircraft burn. 30 seconds. If they'd been 30 seconds slower getting out, they'd all be dead. A medic ran up to him. "Sir, are you hurt?" Morgan looked at his hands. They were shaking. "No," he said quietly, "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He'd just landed a 36-ton bomber at 142 miles per hour with no landing gear, no flaps, and no brakes, kept it under control during a mile-long slide, got his entire crew out safely, and escaped an explosion by 30 seconds. The adrenaline was wearing off. The reality was setting in. He'd just done something that should have been impossible. John Red Morgan was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for the landing. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement while serving as pilot of a B-24 aircraft. After sustaining severe damage to hydraulic systems, Lieutenant Morgan skillfully maneuvered his aircraft to a safe landing, saving the lives of his entire crew." Morgan flew 12 more combat missions before the war ended in May 1945. He returned home, left the military, became a commercial airline pilot, and flew for 35 years. He rarely talked about the landing. When asked about it, he'd say, "I just did what I was trained to do." But that wasn't true. He'd done something he was never trained to do, something the manual said was impossible. He'd succeeded because he practiced 15 times. He'd flown the approach over and over until he understood the exact margins, the precise power settings, the specific speeds required. And when the moment came, he executed perfectly. There's a lesson in Morgan's story that applies beyond aviation. When faced with an impossible situation, most people panic or give up. Morgan did neither. He broke the problem down, identified what he could control, practiced until he understood the margins, then executed with precision. That's not luck. That's skill combined with discipline. The name Lucky Lady was ironic. There was nothing lucky about that landing. It was skill, pure skill. And 9 men are alive today because of it.
Thanks for watching this incredible survival story from World War II Vault. If you want more tales of skill, courage, and survival against impossible odds, make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, and we'll see you in the next story from the Vault.